Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Scorecard Sports. We have a great night of fights tomorrow. I believe a lot of them are going to be really close, and there's going to be a lot of great stylistic matchups and a lot of bangers and back and forth fights. So, without further ado, let's get into these fights. All right, first fight of the prelims, Malcolm Gordon versus Jimmy Flick. I think in this fight, the biggest key to victory is going to be grappling defense and overall grappling control. Jimmy Flick has a very good submission game off his back. He did win his first fight in the UFC against a very game Cody Durden by flying triangle choke in the first round. And it was very early in the fight, so we didn't get to see much of his overall skill set. In his next fight, he showed that maybe he might not have the best cardio or striking. He is good on the ground, but I don't think he necessarily has the means to get the fight there. Malcolm Gordon, I believe, is good with his submission defense. If he can get the fight to the ground if he wants, he could also keep it on the feet. I think he has slightly better striking, cardio. I also think that if the fight goes to the ground, he'll be able to stop a lot of the sweeps and submissions of Flick. So I'm going to go with Malcolm Gordon by decision. Moving on to, I always butcher this name, Jasmine Jasudavicius versus Priscila Cachoeira. This fight is on in the odds. I think Jasmine is a minus around nearing a minus 400. I do think the fight is closer than that. I believe, however, I do believe Jasmine is going to win. I think she can pressure Cachoeira. She can really get her against the cage. She's good in the clinch. I think she can drag her down and kind of grind her out to a decision. My main concern with Jasmine in this fight is her striking is slow, and Priscila does carry a lot of power and she is fast. So she could catch Jasmine. But on the flip side, Jasmine does also have a good chin. So overall, I'm going to be going with Jasmine by decision. On to the next fight. Yohan Lainesse versus Sam Patterson. This is Sam Patterson's second fight and his first fight at welterweight in the UFC. Before this, he debuted at lightweight against Yanel Asmouz. Patterson is 6'3". Asmouz was 5'7". Asmouz was able to catch one of the kicks of Patterson and counter him with an overhand right into a lead left hook while Patterson was falling to the ground and get the knockout. And because of that, while Patterson does have good feints, good kicks, and solid straight shots with his hands, with his jab and his straight, Yohan Lainesse is a guy who carries a lot of power in his shots. He has 76-inch reach. He is also 6'1". And from the fight against Yanel Asmouz, we did see that Sam Patterson's boxing defense might be lacking. He does what I believe saved him a lot at 155 was his 6'3" frame. He was able to get away with a lot defensively because of his height. And I do think going up in weight against a guy like Lainesse, who does hit extremely hard, has great overhands and great lead hooks, I could see Patterson having trouble with the range and just Lainesse being able to catch him with something big and either get the finish or be able to maybe etch out a decision. Lainesse has gassed out in the past. However, in his fight against Weeks, he did show an improved gas tank. So I'm going to be going with Yohan Lainesse, I believe, by knockout, or knockout decision. I believe he can catch Patterson and do a lot of damage. On to the next one. Gillian Robertson versus Polyana Viana. I believe at strawweight is the perfect weight for Gillian Robertson. She's very long, lanky, and she has been able to she has shown improvements in her striking at strawweight. I do think she's just a little bit better everywhere than Polyana Viana. I think she can kind of keep her at range on the feet. If Polyana does close the distance and look to grapple, Gillian Robertson is nasty on the ground. She has the most submissions in the flyweight division's history. And I think she's either going to catch her with something on the feet, finish her on the ground, or she's going to eventually herself be able to drag Polyana Viana to the ground and lock up a submission. So I'm going to go Gillian Robertson by first, second round submission. On to the next one, the big rematch of their matchup on Dana White's Contender Series, Sidey versus Ramon Taveras. In their first fight, Sidey was able to land a right straight on Ramon that dropped him, and the fight was prematurely stopped. Now they're having their rematch in the UFC. Sidey is very good at switching stances, setting up combinations with his switch stances, looking for his outside leg kicks, his kicks to the body, roundhouses to the body, and he does have pretty good hands, a good jab, and he has a hook and an overhand. I would say similar to someone like Colby Covington, where it comes from weird angles, but it does hit hard. And I do think in this fight he'll have a grappling advantage and possibly a cardio advantage as well. We've seen CD go 5 rounds on multiple occasions on the regional scene. Ramon Taveras on the flip side has excellent boxing, especially offensive boxing, great combinations behind his jab. He also has shown to have very powerful counters as well. He had a good hook counter to Charles Crazy Horse Bennett in their fight that knocked him out. He's also, I think his last fight, he dropped his opponent numerous times on the regional scene. And overall, his just boxing is probably the calling card of his game. However, I do think I CD has the slight edge in this one, and I do believe he'll be able to pull this one out. I just think he can contend with Ramon Taveras on the feet, and he could drag the fight to the ground if he wanted to. If he stays away from he's very lanky, stays away from the power of Ramon, I believe he can land a lot of leg kicks, jabs, land his hooks, switch stances, and really set up his takedowns. And he could just grind on Taveras and just kind of wear him out and just win a decision. So ultimately, I'm gonna go with City. On to the next fight, Charles Jourdain versus Sean Woodson. Charles Jourdain is a great striker, also great on the ground. His main problem in the UFC has been consistency. But when Charles Jourdain is at his best, I do believe he's an absolute killer, world beater, and definitely an elite level fighter. Sean Woodson is another tall, lanky guy for the featherweight division. He does do a good job fighting behind his jab. He does have good boxing. He also has pretty good takedown defense. When it gets to the ground, he's solid at getting back to his feet. I do think that his chin at times has been somewhat questionable. And for this fight, I do want to have to side with Charles Jourdain because at Charles Jourdain's best, like I said, he is a world beater. I do think on the feet, he's extremely slick. I could see him doing something similar to his last fights where he drops Woodson and looks to set up a submission on the ground and finish him with a guillotine or any of his front chokes. So ultimately, I'm gonna go with Charles Jourdain. On to the next fight, Brad Katona versus Garrett Armfield. Garrett Armfield has this is his second fight at bantamweight. He debuted at 145 against David Onama, which he ended up losing the fight by arm triangle. But Garrett Armfield is a guy who does have long arms for 135. He has a great jab, good boxing, and he packs a lot of power in his hands. He also has solid takedown defense. But Brad Katona is a guy who has also very good boxing. I believe he was on the Canadian national team for boxing. He's also shown a well-rounded skill set in MMA from mixing in wrestling, submissions, and takedowns. He also has very good cardio. And I think that's going to be the big difference in this fight is the well-rounded game of Brad Katona. I think he can drag Armfield to the ground, kind of bank away rounds, stand with him, and instead of seamlessly go between stand up and taking him down, and vice versa, mixing the wrestling to help his striking and the striking to help his wrestling. And Armfield being submitted by David Onama does make me believe that Brad Katona does have the ability to submit Armfield as well. I think Katona, who has shown a very good ability to just etch out decisions in his career, is probably going to be able to do that in this fight here. So I'm going to go with Brad Katona by decision. On to the next one, and my personally most anticipated fight of the night: Arnold Allen versus Movsar Evloev. Movsar Evloev is an undefeated Dagestani Russian fighter who has great wrestling, but also has shown good footwork and good striking as well. He's been able to mix in all of that into his game, mix it up against opponents, and this has led him to an undefeated record. However, I believe Arnold Allen, in my opinion, is the most underrated fighter in the entire UFC. He has a 10-1 record in the UFC. His only loss is a very competitive fight to Max Holloway. And if he made some adjustments, I believe in round 3 or round 4, he could have even possibly beaten Max Holloway. Arnold Allen is very big for the division. He's extremely strong. He's athletic. He has great footwork, a great jab, very good takedown defense. His last fight where someone was really trying to smother him with their wrestling was against Nick Lentz, and he was able to stuff every takedown from Lentz. Arnold Allen does a very good job. So in wrestling, they say to stop takedowns first with your head, then your hands, and then your hips. Arnold Allen does a very good job of that. He has a stance where he is almost leaned over his legs, and he's able to use that to bring his hands up and frame and get his hips away from opponents, also to get good head position and just create space that allows him to circle away from the takedown. And footwork and that kind of hand placement and wrist control, I think, is going to pay dividends in this fight. And I also believe his jab is going to be a massive factor in this fight as well. We have seen Evloev struggle against strikers like when he was bum rushed by Diego Lopez. And if Diego Lopez was able to land some shots, I'm pretty confident in Arnold Allen's ability to do so as well. So ultimately, I do believe this is going to be a very close fight, but I am going to go with the underdog, Arnold Allen. I think his athleticism, footwork, takedown defense, and jab are really going to pay dividends in this fight and really lead him to the victory. On to the next one, and the fight I personally believe will be the banger of the night: Marc-Andre Barriault versus Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis does a very good job of finding his shots on the feet in his boxing and having very good patience to he will allow you to tee off on him and land strikes as he just walks you down and waits for his opportunity to strike and really get that KO. He's able to do that to Brendan Allen and Phil Hawes. However, Marc-Andre Barriault in his last fight against Eric Anders really showed a well-rounded skill set. He was great in the clinch, landing elbows, knees, and being able to stop a lot of the takedown attempts of Eric Anders. I don't believe he's going to need that takedown defense in this fight, but he also did a good job of landing straight shots and mixing in a lot of kicks. I could see a world where Marc-Andre Barriault does implement a similar game plan to that of Jack Hermansson's when he fought Chris Curtis, where he's really utilizing all of his 6'1" frame and his reach and kicks to really frustrate Chris Curtis and keep him on the outside and just kind of pot shot him and just constantly stay out of the range of the hands of Chris Curtis, who is undersized at 185, being 5'10". I could see Barriault using the footwork to get away. And if Chris Curtis was to get in close and they were to fight in the clinch, Barriault is very good there as well. Chris Curtis is also good at finding his dirty boxing combos. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Marc-Andre Barriault. I think he will be able to sneak out a decision, kind of pot shotting him from the outside using his footwork. And also, Andre Barriault, the calling card of his entire game is his cardio. And I think that could be the difference in this fight as well. So ultimately, I'm going Marc-Andre Barriault. On to the next one, MikeMalott versus Neil Magny. It seems like Neil Magny constantly is fighting these young up-and-coming guys who are extremely talented, and I think this fight is no different. Neil Magny is very good, but I do think he needs certain advantages in his fights to truly have a vintage Neil Magny performance. I do believe that's an advantage in cardio, being able to land his straight shots and wrestling. If he doesn't have all three of those, or at least two of those, I think he does at times tend to struggle in fights. And I believe MikeMalott is a guy who is extremely well-rounded. He has a lot of finishes. He's a good submission game, very powerful striking, good kicks, mixes it up well on the feet. And I do believe that he can really stifle a lot of what Neil Magny does very well in this fight. So, and it is in his backyard of Canada. So ultimately, I'm going to go with MikeMalott. I think he can probably get this fight by decision or by possibly maybe even knockout or submission. It'll be very hard for him to submit Neil Magny, who I believe has only been submitted twice in the UFC in almost 20 plus fights. But on to the next one, Raquel Pennington versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Raquel Pennington had an upset in her last fight against Caitlin Vieira, who was looking like she was about to be the next champion of this division. And Raquel Pennington had an amazing performance. She did a great job using her boxing, mixing in her wrestling. And that's where she does a lot of her great work, is using the hands to set up the takedowns and vice versa. And she's able to kind of do that for 5 rounds. That'll be a question mark with Bueno Silva, as we haven't seen her go 5 rounds because she's been able to finish so many fights. And I think overall, Raquel has all the tools to win this fight. She just has to stay away from the wrestling and really utilize her boxing. However, we've seen that at times she just can't help herself but to wrestle. And I think that's going to put her in danger against someone like Bueno Silva, who you would not even really want to entertain the grappling game with her, much like a Charles Oliveira. She's so good at just quickly latching on to submissions and just locking them in and finishing the fight. That was apparent in her fight with Holly Holm, where Holly Holm was out grappling her against the cage, really just kind of holding her there and controlling her. But she did leave her head on the inside for far too long, and Bueno Silva was able to lock up a ninja choke and get the submission in the second round after losing pretty much the entire fight. And I think something like that could happen in this fight against Raquel Pennington, where she's winning. Bueno Silva bum rushes her, starts landing big shots, causes Raquel to panic wrestle, and then Bueno Silva is able to get the fight where she wants, latch onto some submissions, chain them together, get on top, and then attack other submissions. So ultimately, I'm going to go with Bueno Silva in this one. I believe that her aggression on the feet, her striking, and her overall submission game is just going to be a little bit too much for Raquel Pennington. So I'm going to go with Bueno Silva by submission. On to the big one, Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. This is probably the hardest fight I've ever had to break down. Both fighters have such unique styles, and you're not going to find anyone who can emulate either guy. Sean Strickland, with his Philly shell and his overall defense, that's extremely good, but very much so awkward and only really implemented by Sean Strickland. And the same can be said about Drickus, who does carry a lot of power, but I believe the main calling card and kind of a massive strength of Drickus is his unpredictable, erratic, and at times almost spazzy timing in the way he moves in and out and how he crashes into opponents and kind of blitzes them. Also, Drickus does a very good job of fighting behind a high guard, but when he implements the high guard, he doesn't stay in place and sacrifice mobility, because we've seen in the past with fighters like Patterson, when he implements the high guard, he leaves himself open to takedowns and a lot of other kind of striking combinations, which Drickus is able to avoid with his movement. We've also seen Drickus has a very good ground game. He's different than a lot of the guys at 185, at least the old guard. When Drickus gets someone to the ground, he's not looking to kind of lay on top of them and score points. He's trying to finish the fight. And that's the biggest thing with Drickus is everything he does in his fights is to set up the finish and get the finish. And I believe when he rocks people or gets an opportunity to lock something up, he's probably one of the best finish sequence fighters in the UFC. Once he smells blood, it's very hard to survive against him. And we saw this against Robert Whitaker, where in the first round, he was able to get him to the ground, land big ground and pound, try to set up a darts choke from half guard, then in the side control. And he was just landing a lot of big ground and pound shots trying to set up the darts and then using the darts to then set up more elbow ground and pound. And then he was able to catch Robert Whitaker with that southpaw jab and just overall systematically break down Whitaker to eventually get that finish from landing a lot of big switch straight shots, then getting the collar tie and landing that hook to the body, which eventually crumbled Whitaker and he was able to get that finish. But I think a big thing in this fight is going to come down to both fighters not necessarily fighting very well off the back foot or not being as comfortable fighting off of the back foot. So it's going to come down to who can pressure the other one backwards and sustain that for longer in the fight. And with Drickus not having gone 5 rounds before in his career and in the UFC, and Sean Strickland having gone 5 rounds on multiple occasions, I think I'm going to have to kind of edge towards Sean Strickland in that. Also, Sean Strickland does have very good takedown defense. He's good at framing, locking up the hands, and really like circling out or digging underhooks and stopping takedown attempts. And Drickus has shown maybe when he gets on the back foot in his fight against Derek Brunson, when Derek Brunson was coming towards him, throwing haymakers and putting him on the back foot, Drickus ended up taking a panic shot and trying to take down Derek Brunson, who is an All-American wrestler. And I could see Sean Strickland's constant forward pressure, baiting out those takedowns, him stopping them, and just really prodding behind his jab. So ultimately, I think because of the cardio advantage, the jab, and just the pressure that I believe Sean Strickland can keep, he's going to bank the latter half of the third round, fourth, and fifth, ultimately win by decision. So I'm taking Sean Strickland. However, this is probably one of the closer fights I've seen in a long time. So even though I'm going with Strickland, I would not say I'm confident in it at all. But with that being said, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments who you believe is going to win this fight, what fight you're most excited for. And I'll see y'all in the next one. I hope you all enjoy the fights, and I'll see y'all later.